So yeah, we'll see how it plays out because again, the old joke we talked about it at the time that Musk split from Trump. Two narcissists walk into a bar. You never know which one of them is going to get hit by that bar or who's going to be swinging it.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got Professor Scott Lucas on the show from the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
A very happy start of the week to you, Maddie.
Well, you and I spoke just last Thursday, and it was a great chat about the FBI hearing, but there's more happening today as we start the week, Monday morning. I want to start off with, of course, what happened on Sunday. Tens of thousands of people gathering for Charlie Kirk's memorial in Phoenix. Kirk's wife, Erica, she forgave the man publicly for killing her husband and spoke about him being the kind of man that Charlie would be trying to save. Trump then did a 45-minute speech at the event where he said that he disagrees with Erica, he hates his opponents, and he also pushed for a few of his own political agendas. So all in all, it was a day of mourning for conservative Americans and I guess conservatives across the globe really who were tuning in. But I wonder, Scott, does an event like this and just mostly Trump's comments and his rhetoric from his speech, does it push the two sides further apart currently in a very divided America?
Maddie, my daddy was a preacher, and his mother, a deeply religious woman, said, don't speak ugly. So we recognize that many of those people who were there yesterday in Arizona were there to honor Charlie Kirk and were there to mourn over his killing. But at the same time, I think we can say that some of those who were on that stage addressing that crowd did talk ugly. Even before you get to Donald Trump, you talk about Stephen Miller, who is a driving force behind Trump as his speechwriter, as his advisor, talking about going out to slay the dragons, an army to slay the dragons. In other words, Trump's enemies. And then you had Trump take the stage, and I think amidst a fairly rambling speech, which quite often were about his personal grievances rather than about Kirk, I think the soundbite that people will feature today is where he says that Erica Kirk, well, Erica, you might have forgiven, the person who killed Charlie. You might have talked about kindness, but I hate my political opponents. And Trump, for all his lies, for all his falsehoods, sometimes he doesn't lie. He puts it out there on the table. And in that speech, he talked not only about that hatred of political opponents, he talked about going after them if they disagreed with him, if they criticized him. Of course, he framed it as, those who had, for example, commented about Charlie Kirk's actions or Charlie Kirk's beliefs. But Trump was actually saying, you come after me, I'm going to come after you. And he gave as an example, pointedly, he talked about putting the military on the streets of Chicago, as he has done in LA, as he has done in Washington, and as he's threatening to do with other cities. He gave a long screed about how America is threatened by the enemies within, as he calls not just the so-called radical left, but anyone that he thinks is against him. So rather than unity, and rather than forgiveness, he is talking about division. He's talking about an us versus them, and that fits what Trump wants to do, which is to expand his power. And let's be honest, we said this soon after Charlie Kirk was murdered, that there were people across the political spectrum and on social media who were not kind, who did speak ugly. But the exploitation of Charlie Kirk's murder starts with the man in the White House and those around him, because they will use this to try to effectively move towards what is an authoritarian approach to politics in U.S. society.
And that's what's concerning, Scott, because right now what it seems, you and I across the pond looking at what's happening, and I've spoken to a few people on this show from both sides of the political aisle who say in America right now on the ground, it is so heavily divided, it is so heavily extreme on both sides. And so you would have thought that Trump would have gone down the same path as Erica and been more, let's unite, let's continue to push the conservative movement, of course. You would have expected that, but just less hate, less ugly discussion, as you mentioned. But I want to move on into what kind of gained the attraction of online users, Scott, is of course this clip of Elon Musk and Donald Trump publicly reuniting, potentially burying the hatchet. These two were having an exchange at Kirk's memorial. A lip reader has claimed the interaction saw Trump greet Musk with "How are you doing?" So Elon, I've heard you wanted to chat. He then leaned in with a suggestion, let's try and work out how we get back on track. Musk simply nodded in response as Trump tapped his hand and said, "I've missed you." So your reaction to this, Scott, do we think we'll see these two back on track, best friends?
Oh, man. Where do we start with the one-time besties? You know, it's like, Christ, it's like a very bad version of Ross and Rachel from Friends. They're on again, they're off again, they're on again, I don't care again. I guess this time I have to care because the man who not only claims to be the world's richest man, but the man who was head of whatever that thing was called, Doge or Doggy, or, you know, and, well, you know, the man that headed up Doggy, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, wants to get out of the doghouse and back into the big house. And, you know, gone are the days when Elon was talking about the America Party, the third party to go beyond the Republicans and the Democrats to challenge in the 2026 primaries for congressional seats. Gone are the days when he talked about the fact that he was going to stand up to the wasteful, bloated Trump administration with the big, ugly bill. You know, Elon, for all his excitement, to give it a kind word on social media, for all his trolling, he wants to be in the game. And the game has gone beyond him in terms of the political sense. Economically, of course, you know, Tesla's there, SpaceX is there, whatever his next venture is there. But he hasn't succeeded in getting any political traction by breaking from Trump. And what he has seen since then, which has been significant, of course, is Trump with the tech bros. You know, Trump rolling out the tech bros. It was one of the features of Trump's fluffing in the UK last week that some people mentioned it, but they didn't dwell on it. He brought the tech people across, not only because of that big announcement about the US-UK tech partnership that took place, he brought them across so they could be seen, so they could establish partners and networks. These are my guys, right? And when you talk about the Sam Altmans, for example, when you talk about the heads of NVIDIA, you know, Musk wants to be seen with them. So, yeah, we'll see how it plays out because, again, you know, the old joke, we talked about it at the time that Musk split from Trump, two narcissists walk into a bar. You never know which one of them is going to get hit by that bar or who's going to be swinging it.
But Scott, the thing that's changed in this best friendship is the fact that you mentioned that he hasn't really gained much traction on his America Party, but what we have seen from various reports is that he's actually quietly really paused any development of that, because I don't know if you've been following tech news, but he's been really given a slap on the wrist by Tesla shareholders who really want him to be committing to the proposals that he had made. He's now got this $1 trillion pay package on the line where he's got to meet these insane goals, including robots and robo-taxis and the sale of Teslas within the next 10 years. And part of that seems to be that he really needs to hold back on his political ambitions, which is probably why we could have seen this pause. So whether or not it has anything to do with Donald Trump, we actually don't know. But my question before we move off this topic, Scott, is who gets more out of that relationship if they were to reunite? Donald Trump or Elon Musk?
Oh, they both get something, Maddie. I mean, any relationship, you know, Ross and Rachel eventually got married in Friends because they, God knows, saw something in each other.
Well, we don't know if they got married, Scott. Well, that was a cliffhanger. They reunited. We never know if they got married.
Well, God knows. Let's just not have any type of sequel where they're divorced again and then spend like another 5 seasons deciding whether or not they're going to shack up. You know, my life's too short for that. Anyway, on to the serious stuff, which is, so real life, I don't know which one's Ross and Rachel in this relationship, but what Trump gets out of Musk is he gets like, first of all, Musk doesn't cause trouble for him on social media. Musk doesn't cause, and it could have caused trouble if Musk was serious about it. He just didn't have the time, the organizational skills politically to whip up an American party. It could have caused trouble. He gets at least for now, a Musk who plays nicely as part of a group here. What does Musk get out of it? I think you identified it quite well, Maddie, and that is that Musk, who does, have financial interest in the government. I mean, SpaceX gets many, many billions in contracts from the Pentagon. Tesla could be affected by government regulation as well. But much more broadly, what you're seeing in America is a government. This is no longer a free market regarding technology. This is no longer the idea of onwards and upwards with high-tech capitalism. When Trump administration is saying we're going to take 10%, right, of Intel because it's got financial difficulties, when it's talking about effectively a government-private partnership with whatever the future of TikTok is, we wait to see how that plays out. When it talks about subsidies or arrangements with companies like NVIDIA, this is a type of what used to be called corporatism in academic speak, which is that the administration of the day is working with certain favored companies in terms of this mutual advance. Now, I don't think Trump gets that economic side of it as much, but he gets the political side of it. And that's where he's going to benefit from Musk coming back in and being the nice, supportive Elon Musk rather than the Elon Musk who's been up way too late and thinking too many dark thoughts.
And especially for Trump's proposals and goals with AI and the government investment in AI, he obviously has a somewhat okay relationship with the tech bros, as you say, Scott. But to have someone's right hand as their right hand, to have someone's ear into this industry is obviously quite beneficial for Donald Trump. But let's move on to, we spoke about free speech and this rhetoric around free speech in the last few months. But journalists who've been covering the Pentagon, Scott, they are now being required to sign a pledge that they will not publish information that has been authorized for release, even if the information is unclassified. And if journalists basically breach this pledge, then they will have their press credentials revoked. The Pentagon says that they had become quite concerned with leaks, but it's also, of course, a threat to press freedom. So your reaction to this?
It's right there in front of you, folks. Hey, don't listen to me. Go to Donald Trump, who said over the weekend when 97% of outlets criticize me and insult me. When 97% of outlets criticize me, that's not free speech. Free speech for me and not for thee. We've known this all along, despite the number of media outlets who've been willing to go along with the charade. And that is that the Trump administration's distortion of free speech was, on the one hand, to lift regulations or lift any type of pushback on what they say, including, if they wanted to, hate speech. And we've seen that not only in the US, but we've seen it in the UK through their partnership with the Reform Party. We also know that what it means is that they then withdraw that free speech when they feel like they're being criticized or challenged. And that's what the Jimmy Kimmel episode highlighted, beyond the Trump administration's effective control now, either directly or indirectly, of much of American media. In terms of the Pentagon, look, when you got Pop Gun Pete Hegseth at the top of that, and he don't want people being mean about him, and I'm sure Pop Gun Pete is on the straight and narrow now, hasn't wandered off of it. I'm sure he hasn't lost any more of his advisors since he lost almost all of them in the first few months. I'm sure that he hasn't been on WhatsApp lately, leaking war plans to anybody. I'm sure that none of that has happened. But the fact here is that there is a war going on within the Pentagon. Military commanders are not happy with the political direction of what's been happening. They're not happy with the chaos. They're not happy with the uncertainty. They're not happy with the instability over the U.S. relationship with Europe. They're not happy with the uncertainty over plans with China. They're not happy with where the U.S. is in the Middle East. They are discomfited by what's happening regarding Israel and Gaza.
And Scott, let's keep on that, because basically under these new laws, journalists are literally banned from basically roaming the halls, being able to look into certain offices, being able to look at certain big dogs, people that they want to speak to. Some journalists even losing their working space. And we've seen that before because, of course, some media were revoked from even being in the White House press team. So we've seen this already, of course. But this is, media not being allowed to basically do their job within the Pentagon. So how do you think this situation, these new rules will hinder important stories from being published, but also important military sources coming forward?
Well, I mean, good journalists are going to get the stories. They're just going to have to get it outside of the halls of the Pentagon.
Yeah, but the thing is, Scott, is that no military sources ever come through as someone named. They never even come through with their rank, their title, or anything.
Of course not. But what's going to happen is that you will get people, and you know this, Maddie, come on. You're going to get people that are going to speak on background, as we call it, to journalists, where there'll be unattributed sources. So good journalists will get that, but it's going to be more difficult. It's going to be more difficult to get stories, because it's going to be more difficult not only because you can't get into the halls of power, you've got to rely elsewhere to get the stories. It's going to be more difficult because the attempt here is to intimidate people from speaking out. And this applies to both civilian and military personnel in the Pentagon. Remember, the Pentagon isn't just simply the commanders that I talked about. It's not just simply the officers. It's all the civilians who work in terms of administration and works in terms of holding together the world's largest military with the world's largest military budget. And there have been a series of stories which have come out about the discord in the Pentagon, especially around Pete Hegseth, and they've come from civilians as well as the commanders. That's why, remember, Pete Hegseth ordered polygraph tests on his own top advisors because he thought they were the leakers that take place. I'll give you an echo of this, Maddie, because it is basically, this is Nixon on steroids. Richard Nixon, who was quite a paranoid man when he was in office, late 60s, early 70s, he put out the orders, which were stop talking to journalists, stop talking to journalists. Now, when people continued to talk to journalists, when there was information that came out in newspapers, he actually spied on some of his own government officials, and he ordered a group to fix the leaks. Who fixes the leaks? The plumbers. Who did the plumbers become? The guys that did the Watergate break-in. Now, that historical story is a mild version of what's happening now. Because what you have here, we go back to the top, is when you have an authoritarian regime or the quest for one, no one should be writing anything bad about the dear leader. And that means that journalists who threaten to write something bad have got to be kept off the premises.
Yeah, which is insane because we see what's happening in Russia. We see what happens in North Korea. We even know that the Moscow Times is not even stationed in Moscow. They're not even in Russia anymore, which was obviously years ago. But let's move on to, you mentioned the concern over how the US is how the Trump administration is handling China in regards to concerns from those working at the Pentagon. But several reports are suggesting, Scott, that Trump has either paused or declined sending $400 million worth of a weapons package to Taiwan, which includes munitions and drones. Now, this could be a major policy shift if this is correct. But do you think it has anything to do with the fact that Donald Trump will likely meet Xi Jinping next month on the sidelines at APEC?
Let me ponder on that for a second. Yes, it does. I mean, yeah, it's just blatant. The fact is that these talks, which are now fairly protracted trade talks with the Chinese, I mean, you know, we're going back to April when Trump was slapping tariffs on everybody and got up to 245% on China before pulling back some of that. Now, we are going into almost 6 months later, and we don't have a resolution on where those U.S.-Chinese talks are going to go economically. But what it also means is that politically the Chinese can spin out the talks as well. And certainly the Chinese, if they can get a concession from Trump, which is that he's going to suspend military aid to Taiwan, then they're going to be celebrating. And let me give you 2 points to spin off of that. One which is beyond China, one which comes back to Capitol Hill. Donald Trump does this. You know, go back to 2019. Donald Trump wanted, in this case, not a trade deal. He wanted Ukraine to dish dirt on Joe Biden. He wanted it, if they didn't have the dirt, he wanted them to make it up. What did he do? He suspended military aid. Around about $300 million at that point, got him impeached. Now this time, to get back to Washington, I don't think if he suspends military aid to Taiwan, it's going to get him impeached. But what I'm going to watch in this It used to be that if you made any move to cut Taiwan aid, the Republicans on Capitol Hill, that's a red line. We don't abandon that ally. That goes all the way back to the 1950s, soon after what was the nationalist Chinese government had to decamp to Taiwan. Are the Republicans on Capitol Hill actually going to observe that red line, or are they going to bow down yet again to Donald Trump? We'll wait and see.
Well, let's put it into layman's terms, Scott. Regardless of congressional approval or not on this, is Trump willing to throw Taiwan to the sharks in order to get a trade deal, among other things, over the line with China?
Yeah, I think so. I do. I do. I mean, I think the fact of the matter here is that Trump wants the photo op again. Not only does he want the trade deal, he wants to go to China, and he wants Xi in Washington. I'm also going to say something that Trump has said and so on. He admires the fact that that Xi is president for life. I wish I could be president for life, right? He actually admires this guy, the authoritarian. So, if 400 million, that's pocket change to a super billionaire like Trump. So it should be pocket change to Taiwan. Now it's not. But yeah, I think he'll go that far. But again, you do raise that key point, Maddie. The fact here is that it's Congress which authorizes military packages in terms of the spending. So, guys, where stand you? Where stand you on this? Do you choose Trump's ego, or do you choose a country which supposedly is an American ally?
It'll be interesting to see that because every time John Bolton comes on this show, Scott, he always says China is the biggest threat to the United States. That is a fact. That is what is happening right now and has been for a number of years. So he always circles back to that. And even though, of course, he has his own issues with Trump and Trump has his issues with him, I think that would be quite a universal opinion within the Republican Party, whether or not they're going to publicly come out and say that because, of course, they're anxious to get on the wrong side of Trump. But just to wrap up the interview, Scott, I just want to read out a quote. Let's move on to the Russia and Ukraine war. The special US envoy to Ukraine, retired General Keith Kellogg, he told The Telegraph this interesting quote this week. He said, Putin is being misled. He unfortunately thinks that he is winning this war and he isn't. So Trump is just giving him latitude and the time to come to the negotiating table, but we still hold the cards. He also thinks that Putin will absolutely, he said, attack another NATO country if he does capture Ukraine. He says you have to look at Putin and Russia as expansionist power. He wants to reestablish the Russian Empire. Just look at history. Give him an inch and he'll take a mile. Now, this is, of course, stuff that you and I know, that many military analysts have told me multiple times, once, twice a week. But this is Keith Kellogg, in Trump's inner circle, in his ear, saying, look, Putin's not winning the war. And that he's also publicly saying that Trump's giving him time to come to the negotiating table. But do we really think how do you think that Trump is reacting to this advice from Keith Kellogg, or just even comments about what is really happening, telling him who's actually in the driver's seat? But also, if this is the case and Putin is not winning the war, which we know is true, then why isn't Trump going ahead and slapping further sanctions or being publicly harder on Putin?
Okay, let's take it with Trump before we get to the important part, which is Trump administration officials. Look, I've said it again and again, Trump spins like a weather vane, right? Depending on who's been talking to him. But in this case, Trump didn't give a damn this weekend because Trump's focused on Charlie Kirk, right? So he don't want anything to get in the way of that. So, he paid little heed if he even noticed Kellogg's remarks. I'm sure he will notice them, but he didn't pay any attention. There was a quick question asked to Trump about the Russian overflights. Now, Russia, within the past 2 weeks, sending the drones into Poland, one that goes into Romania, and then the 3 jets in the serious incident on Friday that went over Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. And finally, yesterday, Trump came out and said, reporter asked him, are you concerned about this? Are you concerned? Will you do something about it? He goes, well, yeah, I would. Yeah, I would. If European countries are attacked by Russia, I would do something. It's being blown up today in the sense that I think Trump did it as a throwaway remark, which was yeah. Okay, here's the serious point that we're talking about here. Trump, on security guarantees, has just handed it off to his officials. Trump on sanctions is trying to get out of doing anything because he's playing what Donald Trump does, which is, I don't want any money out of my pocket. So he's saying, okay, I'll put sanctions on Russia over those attacks on Ukrainian civilians and over the refusal to cease fire. But Europe, you go first. Europe, you have to cut all your oil and gas supplies from Russia. Now, Europe is trying to do that. We can talk about that on another pod. And they indeed advanced the target date to cut Russian gas supplies last week. They cut it to the 1st of January 2027. They moved it forward a year. So Europe's getting there, but of course they have to deal with Trump's allies, Robert Fico of Slovakia, Viktor Orban of Hungary, who don't want those, who still want to get Russian gas. So that's kind of a complicated European story, and Trump's hiding behind it. But are his officials hiding behind it? So I think Keith Kellogg's interview to The Telegraph is interesting for two reasons. One is it's a signal to those European powers. We know what you're facing. We know that Putin will not cease fire. That's why I used The Telegraph for the interview. And secondly, it is a signal back to Trump through other officials in Washington. And that is, we've got to accept that Putin is not going to, even as we say, give him space to negotiate, he's not going to negotiate. So what are we going to do about it? Gradually, despite the spinning weather vane, I think U.S. officials are moving closer to some type of increased military aid for Ukraine, not aid, military sales to Ukraine through European partners, some type of security guarantee if Russia can be halted, and I think they are moving to a sanctions package, but I think it's going to come from Congress rather than Trump leading from the front on this.
And we'll be waiting for that, and we'll be waiting for Lindsey Graham's sanctions package to see the light of the Senate floor. So all in a day's work. Scott Lucas, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
All right, then. Hang in there. It's going to be a bumpy week.